All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Joe Imbriano coming to you from the studio of the Fullerton Informer from Orange County, California. We've got a very special program tonight and an extremely important guest with a topic that is really gonna all I could say, folks, is it's really gonna rock your world because we've got a very special guest tonight. Her name is Sofia Smallstorm, and she is a researcher, a publisher, a nutritional consultant. She is just an all-around great gal who's got a tremendous amount of knowledge. And every time I have a conversation or I meet with Sofia, it's always a positive and great experience. So I just want to make sure we've got. Looks like the notifications are rolling. We're almost up to 100 people now in literally 25 seconds. So that's good. All right. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest tonight. And once again, this is Sofia Smallstorm. Sofia, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Well, Joe, I just have to say hi to everyone. I think this is the second time I've been on your show this year. I was on recently, and I got a wonderful response from people. I heard from a lot of them. They were very grateful and very nice to write to me, to reach out. A lot of people ordered iodine and magnesium from my online store and then wrote to say how much that was helping them. So I think you have a fantastic audience of really great people who are alert and awake. And I just want to say one thing. I am not a nutritional consultant. I am simply someone who's looked into certain things and, as you say, is able to give a 7th grade science explanation about those things, right, Joe?
Yeah, you really have an ability to put it into terms that people can relate with and understand. I sometimes am a little over the top with the vernacular and the voice inflection, but that is something I can't help. So at any rate, yeah, please go on, Sophia. It's always nice to hear from you.
Well, Joe, I'll just say this. You are a real genius in so many ways. You manage to look through, I don't even know what you look at to study and get the information you get, but your retention is really incredible. And your background in chemistry and biology, the studies you did when you were at UC Irvine, you seem to have remembered all of it. And that is really amazing to me, the way that you can quickly and deftly pull from your knowledge bank and you can string things together and create these threads that lead the listener, the follower, to places where they would never otherwise be able to go. So I have to thank you because you really amaze me that, when I talk to you about this stuff, and that's why we have these good talks, because in many instances, I have gone a little bit into some of the things you're talking about, maybe a little deeper, a little more slowly than you have. But you really, you're like the lighthouse that just, the beam goes around and around and around, and it covers all kinds of territory. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you for that, Sophia, and likewise, it's always nice to have discussions with people that have their eyes wide open. And Sophia and I have a lot in common, and one of the big things that I think that Sophia and I have in common that enables us to see, so to speak, is sunlight. Right, Sophia? Did you spend a lot of your years, grounding and spending time in the sun as I did growing up?
Well, Joe, I did it naturally. I was a sun junkie, and I lived in countries that didn't have a lot of sun at times. I lived in Sweden as a teenager, and the Swedes are this way too. They will just soak up the sun in the summer because Sweden is known as the land of the midnight sun, but they hardly get any sun in the winter. The sun sets at 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the afternoon.
Well, folks, I'll tell you, you've got to get sun through your eyes, and you got to be in contact with the earth to get your body to work and your brain to work, and you got to get off the TV set and all the mind control. So, I got Sophia on tonight because I believe we're on the verge of a very big staged outbreak that's going to result in forced vaccinations. And the only real defense we have against such a criminal onslaught is a good offense with information. And Sophia and I both have in agreement that what we've been taught is a lie about the source of illness, and it's a fascinating introduction into a field of study that is 180 degrees off of everything that's in the printed textbooks, in the cabinets, on the shelves, in the libraries, and in the classrooms. And we're going to go into this right now. We're going to talk about viruses tonight, folks. And
Right.
and real quick, my contact information is P.O. Box 4121, Fullerton, California, 92834. And Sophia, what is your website so people can reach you and get in contact with you?
The best is to go through my store, Avatar, like the movie Avatar, AVATAR, avatarproducts.com. And the other one is my blog, Sofia with an S, sofiasmallstorm.com. That's part of a bigger website that's pretty static. I'm not adding to most of that, but I've done a lot of podcasts, which you can see from when you go to the blog. You can listen to some of the podcasts that I have done, and then you can go to YouTube. Some of my best interviews are with Sage of Quay, S-A-G-E of Q-U-A-Y. So if you go to YouTube and type in Sofia Smallstorm, Sage of Quay, there are some really good shows there. He's very methodical. He's a great interviewer and host, and I have covered a lot of ground with him very clearly and slowly. So there's an interview that we did about biological darkness. This is what your body lives in when it doesn't get sunlight. When it gets artificial light, your body thinks it's night. So that's a very interesting show. And then there are a few others there. We covered glyphosate and glycine. Maybe Joe and I can get into that sometime in greater detail. But Joe, I hope to be able to make a habit of doing these interviews with you, because your audience is also wonderful, as is Sage of Clay's audience. And I really would like to be able to connect with them on a regular basis. So shall we start talking about this virus thing?
Let's go right to it, Sophia. So viruses, we've all been told that viruses are the culprit that make you sick, and we got to wash our hands, and we got to use Lysol, and we got to, bleach this and disinfect that, and these viruses are lurking in every corner, and there's all these mysterious viruses emerging viruses that are going to kill everybody. Let's go into it, Sophia.
Okay. So let me just make a distinction. We were taught that we are the victims of germs, and the germ theory of disease really became big with Louis Pasteur. People have heard his name, right? And that's when they started creating all these chemicals to battle bacteria and germs, because they thought that bacteria and germs infected us and made us sick. They created all kinds of products like Lysol and Clorox. They taught housewives through marketing and advertising to be using this stuff ad nauseum all over their houses. And yet, guess what, Joe? People still got sick. People still got sick in spite of all the chemical cleansers that were being dumped all over their bathrooms and houses and clothes and food. Housewives even sprinkled DDT in children's lunch sandwiches.
Well, they had DDT wallpaper in the houses back in the day, and
So people still got sick. So remember the Hegelian dialectic: problem, reaction, solution. So the problem is, oh my, germs and bacteria make us sick. Reaction, let's harness a bunch of chemicals, draw them into everybody's daily life, and we'll take care of this germ problem. But no, people still got sick. So the solution was, oh, guess what? There's something else besides germs. It's even smaller, and it's called a virus. And that's what makes people sick. Viruses are causing disease. So I just want to start in another place for a moment, because you remember, as does everyone listening, when HIV was a really big deal, right? AIDS, HIV.
Oh, that put the fear of God into everybody that had a pulse.
Right. So 1980 was the first year that Newsweek came out with a cover story on this disease that was killing people, the wasting disease. It was called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And that was said to develop with, as a consequence of being HIV positive. Human What
It was
HIV
called
stand for?
human immunodeficiency virus.
Virus, right. All right. So I just blanked for a minute. So Dr. Nancy Banks is a friend of mine. She's an absolutely amazing, brilliant woman, and she wrote an incredible book in 2010 called AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire. Everybody who has curiosity about this virus thing, about the drug trade going back to the East India Tea Company, the East India Company, and who's interested in medicine, the evolution of medicine, the war on people, the war on self, the war on health, they've really got to read this book, AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire. At the very beginning of the book, first thing you see when you open the book is a long list of conditions that may well give you a positive result on the HIV test. And I have excerpted a few of those conditions. I wrote a newsletter on all of this over the last couple of months. So guess what gives you a positive outcome on the HIV test? Leprosy, tuberculosis, kidney failure, flu vaccination, herpes simplex 1, herpes simplex 2, upper respiratory tract infection, malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, tetanus vaccination, organ transplantation, various autoimmune diseases, hepatitis, alcoholic liver disease, multiple myeloma, hemophilia, hyperbilirubinemia, and primary biliary cirrhosis. These are just a few things. The list
Sophia,
has 75 or 80 things in it.
You've just covered the entire population right there.
Well, let me tell you why you can get a positive HIV result from any of these conditions and more. Because the HIV test, Joe, is a non-specific antibody test. It picks up antibodies, not specific antibodies, just any antibodies. Now, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's a broad brush they're using to paint the side of a barn that they've designed a target on, and this is just more of the same, fear mongering, getting us to accept that there's this imminent threat facing us that we can't see, that no one can identify the source of, and we've always got to be prepared for their canned solution to it. And,
right.
And lo and behold, what did they come out with was the retroviruses, retroviral drugs that were killing people faster than the supposed syndrome. It's like going around a glass house with a hammer to kill a fly. And by the way, folks, real quick, it's hammer time. Just so if you're watching right now, it's hammer time for a lot of stuff, folks. And it's hammer time for your understanding of the lies that have been inculcated into your skull. So I want you to listen. Go ahead, Sophia.
Right. Nancy Banks has the most amazing way of putting things. And after she explains just a little bit about what this HIV test was and what they did as a consequence, they gave everybody medications that caused oxidative stress and led to deaths ultimately. So she says, whether HIV exists and works as stated is not the point.
It's not the point. It's not the issue.
Like all villains created for mobilization purposes, truth suffers the first great defeat. Selling the world on a particular point of view is what matters. Okay, and they needed to sell us on viruses big time, once again in the 80s. And they did it in the 50s. The big scare in the 50s was polio. Yep. Okay?
And so, I like to make an analogy. I'll repeat this really quick. I used to ride my bike to the beach when I was a kid, and let me tell you, it'd be a 15-mile trek from Garden Grove to the Balboa Pier to the Wedge or to Newport Beach. And if I ran over broken glass, I'd be in big trouble because I'd be 10 miles from home with no way to get back. And so I always knew where there was a car accident because there was broken glass. Now, I learned over time that when there's broken glass, that it was generally a car accident that caused it, because I would see the parts of the colored lenses from the car. But I never thought that the broken glass caused a car accident. But that's exactly how medicine is telling us to think when it comes to supposed pathogens. Go on, Sophia.
All right, so polio back in the 50s was the big deal. And official websites everywhere will tell you, if you look it up, that polio is a paralyzing nervous system disease caused by a virus. It's highly contagious. It can be spread through contaminated water, and that children under 5 are most susceptible. And then, guess what? The Mayo Clinic says that there's non-paralytic polio. People don't even know they have it. And here are the symptoms: fever, sore throat, headache, vomiting, fatigue, back pain or stiffness, neck pain or stiffness, arm or leg pain or stiffness, muscle weakness or tenderness. These are symptoms of polio, supposedly, non-paralytic polio. I mean, does that not serve as a broad brush covering a ton of people under very ordinary circumstances?
Yep. Once again, a broad brush to paint the side of a barn to put a target on it aimed right at us with a canned solution. In their instance, it was a syringe with God knows what was in it.
Right. So let's look back at the 1900s, the mid-1900s. Why were children becoming paralyzed in the mid-1900s? What marks the 1900s? Well, that was the chemical age.
Pollution.
It was the industrial age, and it was the radiation age, right?
Petroleum and the Manhattan Project.
Exactly. We had nuclear tests that generated huge amounts of atmospheric fallout. And I remember reading in some magazine, this was when I was very young, somebody was recollecting how she was a child in the West. Remember the Nevada testing, and there was all this rose-colored dust that fell from the sky, and the children would all draw their names and write their names and draw pictures on the hood of the car in the pink dust, and then they'd go inside to eat lunch. Okay. So we had people developing these diseases that they've told us now are modern diseases genetically caused. And they would be ALS, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy.
Hi, Jerry Lewis, wherever you are. Nice try covering up the scam, buddy, wherever you ended up. Go on.
Yeah, so I remember reading about these diseases when I was 10 or so. I'd read about them in my mother's magazines, Red Book, McCall's Ladies' Home Journal, and they would say, oh yeah, people develop these diseases in their 40s. And I was only 10 or 12. I was a little precocious reading that stuff. But I would shudder and wonder, oh my gosh, is it going to happen to me? How do you get these? And they were just spooky, mysterious conditions that showed up later in life. Well, guess what? We're going to go to a man called Leo Szilard. Szilard. And let me tell you that is an acronym for lizards. Lizards.
Oh, boy.
Okay?
David Icke's out there somewhere.
Yeah. So Leo Szilard was an inventor, a physicist. He was quite a genius. He was born in the Kingdom of Hungary in 1898. And he moved to America, and he was a major pusher of the Manhattan Project. He and Einstein wrote a letter to President Roosevelt, and I believe it was Roosevelt. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but yes. So here it is, a confidential letter to President Roosevelt.
And by the way, Einstein was a total fraud, ladies and gentlemen.
Right, but these were very influential men in that era. Fraud doesn't mean they were stupid. These were geniuses.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Szilard drafted a confidential letter to the president. This is from Wikipedia I'm reading, explaining the possibility of nuclear weapons, warning of the German nuclear weapon project, and encouraging the development of a program that could result in creation of American weapons, right? So with the help of Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, you know that name,
yeah.
atomic bomb Teller, he approached his old friend and collaborator Albert Einstein in 1939, convinced him to sign the letter, and then the Einstein-Szilard letter resulted in the establishment of U.S. nuclear fission research, official government research, and eventually to the creation of the Manhattan Project. Okay, So Szilard worked with Enrico Fermi on the patent for the nuclear reactor. This was also called the Uranium Project, the U.S. government's quest for the atomic bomb. Szilard was very big, very active in this. And Szilard is a figure that we need to look at and remember, because he then took up, was given a position at University of Chicago in the metallurgical laboratory. This is during World War II. And he worked with a guy called Aaron Novick, a chemist. And these two decided to plunge into biology. It was a field that had not been explored as physics was, and it was ready for scientific breakthroughs, okay? So what Szilard did with Novick in the 1930s, they invented the chemostat. That was a device for regulating the growth rate of microorganisms in a bioreactor. They developed ways to measure the growth rate of bacteria. They discovered something called feedback inhibition, which is a factor in processes like growth and metabolism. And Szilard was a contributor to many, many people. He contributed important advice to Theodore Puck and Philip Marcus for the cloning of a human cell, the first human cell cloning in 1955. So, what else did Szilard do? There's a very important blog called polioforever.wordpress.com. It's the blog of Jennifer Lake, a good friend of mine. Szilard, Leo Szilard, Mr. Lizards, helped create a method for culturing polio viruses on what is known as the HeLa cell. Now we have to go to this thing called HeLa, H-E-L-A. Joe, have you heard of the HeLa cell?
Yeah, and I just want to make a quick statement here. You know, Sophia has just described the birthing of what's called radiation biology, folks, where they actually have made ruby red grapefruits by irradiating grapefruit trees and stuff. I mean, they've been monkeying around since the 30s, folks. So yeah, the HeLa cell. This poor gal, I guess she was a sharecropper and was working tobacco fields that were watered with radioactive waste, and she grew this massive tumor that just wouldn't quit growing, and they cut it out of her, and they've used this cell line to make everything except for lampshades and bucket seats, I guess, right? I mean, isn't this the cell line that just won't quit, even though if you starve it to death, it still grows and stuff? I mean,
right.
It's in the vaccines.
That is the summary.
Still in the vaccines.
You and I have talked about, yes. So first of all, we'll start with Henrietta, okay, and then we'll explain what they were telling us about viruses. But let's talk about the electron microscope. The electron microscope came about, it was proposed by a guy called Simon Flexner. Do you remember Simon Flexner?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So Simon Flexner was a very important Rockefeller appointee. The Flexner brothers, Bernard Abraham and Simon Flexner, they pretty much put in place allopathic medicine with the Rockefellers. And Flexner was a pretty bright guy. He was the fourth child of Morris Flexner, they came from an educated Jewish family from Czechoslovakia. They immigrated to Kentucky. Now, here's what's very interesting. We think of the Rockefellers as hucksters, right? A lot of these early guys in medicine, we call them hucksters. Well, Flexner started as a peddler. He was a wholesale merchant, and then he was apprenticed to a druggist, and then he went to pharmaceutical school, Louisville College of Pharmacy in Louisville, Kentucky, graduated in 1882, worked in his brother's drugstore, studied medicine at University of Louisville, received an MD degree in 1889. Now, this was when the MD thing was very new and very Rockefellerian, right? And then, he acquired a microscope. And under this microscope, he studied pathological tissues and he made microscopic examinations for doctors who patronized the Flexner pharmacy. So at that time, I want to read here. This was early vaccine development. They were these guys who might as well have been toddlers in a sandbox enjoying their anal stage of development. These people would take diseased mouse brain tissues, mix them with rabbit serum, inject them into healthy mice right through the nose. They'd incorporate diseased, desiccated human spinal cords. They would shoot those into living creatures. They would take rabbit brains suspended in toxic phenol and the contents of intestines and put those into animals. They'd use intranasal, through the nose, injections of human stools, feces in saline solution, popped into rhesus monkeys' brains. Okay, so what happens when you do this to animals? They get paralyzed. Is that a surprise that they have feces in saline solution put in their brain? What do you think is going to happen to them? And this was all the game called proving polio. So we had a disease supposedly that resulted in paralyzing children, and they wanted to make a virus, a vaccine for this disease, polio, containing this virus. And the theory behind virus, disease prevention, viral disease prevention, was to give a little injection and have antibodies made, and that would confer protection. But what had they seen in terms of identifying anything that was a virus? Once they got the electron microscope, this happened, let me just see the date for it, but the electron microscope was what helped them to isolate in their minds what a virus was. Yet all it showed them were fuzzy white blobs, okay? Fuzzy white blobs that they had never seen before, and this, they decided, was proof of something that caused polio, because they'd look at diseased people's tissues and they'd see these things they never saw before, and they decided these were the crippling factor, these blobs. And yet, to this day, no one has ever properly isolated a virus or seen it under a microscope. So when you see these things under an electron microscope, this would be the 1950s when they started publishing these things. Flexner published something called Experimental Epidemic Poliomyelitis in Monkeys. These people did not ask themselves if they were looking at the cause of a disease or the result of a disease. That's the question that was totally skipped over.
And that's when I make the statement, hey, when I was riding my bike to the beach, I knew there was a car accident because I saw the broken glass, but that doesn't mean the broken glass caused a car accident. That's just something you find when there's a wreck, you find broken glass. And when you've got this mitochondrial collapse in the cells from radiation and DDT and hot dogs and ding-dongs, the cleaning crew shows up, and these guys got their racket going with their fancy scanning device, making up pictures and renditions saying, aha, we found it. That's what this is. It's a rig job.
Right. So there was something called palsy that existed for a long time. It started showing up in the late 1800s. Children who lived in the vicinity of apple orchards being sprayed with the first chemical pesticides became paralyzed. This was called palsy.
That's because they're spraying the apples with nerve agents to kill the bugs. What do you think it's doing to the people, right? Nerve agents.
Exactly.
This is monstrous,
That, as we know, the 1900s was the chemical age and the industrial age, and then it became the radiation age. So all we saw was an increasing incidence of paralysis, especially in children. And why would it be children, Joe?
Well, their immune systems aren't strong. Their blood-brain barrier's thin. Their bodies are weak. They can't handle things like grown-ups do. I mean, it's a lot easier to poison a kid than a grown-up. Doesn't take much.
Right. So Jennifer Lake on her blog, polioforever.wordpress.com, writes, polio is a brain infection, sometimes involving the nerves of the spinal cord and sometimes not. It never went away like they say. Most people who get it have a mild case of flu and then it's gone. Almost no one thinks twice about it or ever guesses that it might be something other than the familiar symptoms of a normal bug. We were taught to believe that the vaccines invented by Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin got rid of polio, and only the poorest countries deprived of vaccines are still vulnerable to its crippling effects. But how is it that people who were vaccinated as children end up sick with polio as adults? They call it age-related illness. What is happening in the world today with Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue syndrome, MS, and other neurological illnesses, for instance, ALS, muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's, that are affecting so many people? Is it normal? Is it contagious? And here, Joe, I would ask, is it polio?
Of course it is.
Yes.
You know, I mean, look at the Labor Day weekend muscular dystrophy telethon. Sophia, can you excuse me, please? I got to grab this. Keep going, please. I got someone calling. I've got to take this call. You got the audience, Sophia. Go ahead.
All right. So if you look at the definitions of virus from something called the Universal Historical Dictionary, 1955, you will see that it defines virus as slimy liquid poison, a poisonous substance produced in the body as a result of some disease. So now we go to Webster's Encyclopedic Dictionary of the English Language, 1955. Virus, venom, a poison produced in the body by a disease. Now, these were the 1950s definitions, and they used the word poison. But the important fact here, the important point here, is that they are saying, these dictionaries, that the virus is the result of a disease, the result produced in the body by a disease. So I am going to read again from Jennifer Lake's blog. Viruses are biochemical structures with crystalline shapes, folded fragments of DNA with coded genetic information very similar to enzymes. They're considered key components of evolutionary change carried in the cells of living organisms. Viral infections are usually specific to the type of tissue infected because they are biochemically directed and require a precise set of conditions to occur, including receptors on the surface of susceptible cells. Viral infections can arise when living cells die and decompose, their viral components released in a phenomenon called a cytopathic effect. Okay, so viral release is the body making something biochemical that has a crystalline shape in order to address a situation of disease, damage, or injury in the body. So once again, we're starting to parallel the 1950s definitions. Viruses are produced in the body as a consequence of disease. They're not necessarily a poison. So I guess Joe is still busy on his call.
No, I'm here, Sophia. I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay. So virus equals something made by our own body to address a toxin or poison. With our dying cells, remember we have struggling dying cells because they're being hit with something. Our struggling dying cells trying to receive and implement the special biochemical materials being made within us to save them. Okay? So, I'm reading from the Lake blog. Large inputs of new chemicals introduced in the 1860s began affecting small pockets of people who shared geographic proximity, industrial labors, or contamination sources. So this industrial age, this chemical age, started showing up as disease in people who lived near certain occurrences, certain kinds of locations, did certain kinds of work. That had not happened before.
Well, when you have coal burning everything, burning coal for everything, releasing all that mercury, and you got all these metals and carbon monoxide inversions, and then all the effluents going into the lakes and the rivers and streams, and you got a situation, and then the food supply is not. Malnutrition and poison and pollution and chemicals will cause a systemic collapse, especially of a child. And neuroinvasive encephalitic presentation is, you're going to end up, you're going to collapse. Okay, just like if you have too many Jack Daniels at the Christmas party, you're going to hit the floor. Okay, well that's what happens. Your body shuts down. So when they're blowing up nuclear bombs at 80 miles in the sky, and they're doping everybody up on DDT, and they're doping up all the animals on dibethylstilbestrol, and everybody's drinking the cream top and the ice cream, jacked up on the phytoestrogens, playing with the nuclear dust on the hood of the Model T, you're going to have problems.
Right, exactly. Now, in 2000, the year 2000, there were congressional hearings about the causes of Gulf War syndrome. There were a bunch of doctors that stood before Congress to speak. And one of them, Dr. Howard Ornowitz, related his graduate experience in the lab. Remember, this is the year 2000. So when he was in grad school in the lab, he talked about inducing polio in animals with chemicals and radiation.
That's right. What do you think happened in the 50s? What do you think happened in the 50s? Happy days and dark nights, right?
Now, listen, 50 years earlier, going back from 2000, so that would put us in around 1950, there were two doctors, Biskind and Scobie, and they stood in front of senators, Congress, and told them what was crippling American children, nerve poisons. But nobody wanted to pay attention to this. They had to invent this virus thing because this was a new science that would create new funding, new markets, all these vaccines, vaccine production for viruses. They wanted us to believe that smaller than bacteria and more stealthy and more prone to mutation and reorganization were these things called viruses.
When in fact, they're more than likely just the cleaning crew that your body sends to show up where the mitochondria is collapsed and the thing needs to be cleaned up and moved out. I mean, you got all these immune responses. I mean, you got the T cells, you got these macrophages, look, folks, you've been lied to, okay? And the first thing they do is they hype up a scam with a bunch of fear, and then they ram it down your throat, and they put the pictures on the idiot box to get you to swallow it hook, line, and sinker. And so they're going to parade around all these kids in these iron lungs. And I don't wish that on anybody, but Sophia, let me ask you a question. You remember these pictures of these kids in these iron lungs with the nurses with their white pointy hats? Do you have any idea over the 10-year period in the United States how many children actually ended up in a position where they needed to be on a mechanical ventilator? Do you have any idea how many children ended up in an iron lung over a decade?
I think it was a very low number.
Yeah. Throw a number at me. What do you think it was?
I don't know, Joe, but
it was about 1,000 kids. Okay.
Yeah.
About 1,000 kids ended up on. Now, right now in 2018, where there's supposedly no polio, there's like 300 cases of children who have come down with acute flaccid myelitis, similar, paralyzed from the nose down, need mechanical ventilation to breathe. So it's like, hey, Jerry Lewis, he's in a pine box. He ran his scam forever. And, they relabeled this disease. It's never left. They're still spraying us. They're still irradiating us. And the kids are still falling. They're dropping like flies. And now they've got an even more expanded vaccine regimen because of the decades of propaganda and fear, all based on lies.
Well, let me say, I want to introduce something that I don't think has ever been introduced before into these discussions on viruses. And I just stumbled across it. It was like a big box of bricks that I literally fell over the other day.
Here it comes, ladies and gentlemen. You need to tune in right now. Put out something on the social media right now to get people to tune in to this stream right now. Twitter bomb this thing. Get it out there because here it comes. Go ahead, Sophia.
All right. So 1892, there was a Russian botanist. His name was Dmitry Ivanovsky. And he was he's one of the founding fathers of virology. So one of the early viruses that they talked about and wrote about was this thing called tobacco mosaic virus. Tobacco mosaic virus is also called spot disease. You get these purple spots, mottling, discoloration on leaves, and this is not just on tobacco. It's on tomatoes
yeah,
and
all kinds
orchids and all kinds of plants, all right? So Ivanovsky published a paper in 1903 about the unusual crystal intracellular, he called them inclusions, on the host cells of tobacco plants with this thing called spot disease. And he decided that these crystal inclusions must have to do with the infectious agent that caused the plants to sicken. But I'm saying, were they the cause of the disease, or did they show up as the result of the plant being stressed or diseased? Now, Ivanovsky was able to transfer this stuff that he found from sick plants to healthy plants. And this was considered, quite a discovery, that they were able to move this virus thing from one specimen to another. However, here's what's very interesting. If you look up tobacco mosaic virus on Wikipedia and you go to the bottom of the page, by the way, it infects peppers, cucumbers, all kinds of, like I said, and it'll show up as crinkling, puckering. We've all seen it. Large dead areas on leaves, particularly in hot, dry weather. So it's very, very common. But at the bottom of the Wikipedia page on tobacco mosaic virus, also called TMV, you will see investigational uses. Now I'm going to read you something that totally blew me away. Due to its cylindrical shape, high aspect ratio, self-assembling nature, and ability to incorporate metal coatings, like nickel and cobalt, into its shell, TMV is an ideal candidate to be incorporated into battery electrodes. Addition of TMV to a battery electrode increases the reactive surface area by an order of magnitude, resulting in an increase in the battery's capacity by up to 6 times. So I read that, Joe, and I went, what?
Yeah,
you can smear this virus onto battery electrodes and the battery is 6 times more effective? Well, it's because this is a crystalline material. It is piezoelectric.
That's right.
And what it's doing is it's creating voltage for the sick cell to heal with. And if you look up the work of Dr. Jerry Tennant, Tennant, it's all over YouTube. He is an ophthalmologist who became a bioelectricity expert because he himself became sick. And one of the very popular titles of his presentations, he always talks about healing is voltage. And he says over and over that cells require higher voltage, that is more electrons, to repair themselves from damage and disease than they do for regular maintenance. And as we know, Joe, I have said this in all my presentations lately, that crystalline materials in the body are extremely bioelectrical. So is it any surprise that the unusual intracellular crystal constructs found by Dmitry Ivanovsky in the ailing tobacco plants, that he discovered he could actually transfer into healthy plants, that these things could also be transferred onto battery electrodes with the result of making them more electrical? This is piezoelectricity. So here's my conclusion, and I have no degrees, no PhDs, nothing. Viruses are piezoelectric materials designed to help cells heal. And injured cells are susceptible, that's the word that they use, but what it means is receptive to viruses, because they know that these are electron donors, electron amplifiers, voltage amplifiers, and the body is electrical.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard right there is 180 degrees off of everything you've been taught. You see, viruses are endemic. The body produces them. They produce different kinds. Plants produce them. They're used for a variety of purposes by the body. They're used. There are phages that can kill bacteria and carry away dead material. There are the phages that, depending upon their protein sheath, can and their properties, they can create extra voltage. And let me tell you something, folks. We're talking about something here that you're never going to hear anywhere else. And Sofia has done tremendous research into the things that are hidden in plain view. And I have done tremendous research in trying to figure out a way to get you to realize that reality is inverted and is being run by a bunch of con men, criminal killers. And what they've done is they have now gotten us to the point where they're decades into researching these viral particles, these piezoelectric machines, if you will, that they can screw with and genetically engineer the protein sheath on the exterior of these things and screw with the dipole and screw up the voltage that these things create, which will actually work against healing instead of the natural ones that are endemic to our bodies that aid in healing. This is very dangerous, folks. The nanotechnology and the level of their ability to manipulate things that are so small and so microscopic, they've been able to convince you that they're, number one, the problem, and number two, that you got to take a syringe full of a bunch of different kinds of them to help you, when in fact they have the ability to make these things into weapons. Go on, Sofia.
I'm going to now introduce Henrietta Lacks. So there was a best-selling book written in 2010 by a woman called Rebecca Skloot, Skloot. She took many years to write this book. And the book was a New York Times bestseller. Its title is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Now, Henrietta Lacks grew up in the world of tobacco in Roanoke, Virginia. She was a little girl. They were sharecroppers, she and her family, and everybody worked the tobacco fields. Children didn't even go to school when they had to pick tobacco. They rolled and played in tobacco. They took wagons of dried tobacco bundles to the auction. South Boston was the town, and we're not talking Massachusetts, there's a town in the South, in Virginia, I believe. It was America's second largest tobacco market. And Henrietta and her brothers and sisters children were responsible at that time for picking tobacco and bundling it and all that stuff, getting it ready for market. So Henrietta, when she was 30, began to bleed abnormally. Now this is through the vagina. And she was found to have a very, very strange, shiny purple growth on her cervix. So she went to Johns Hopkins Hospital to be examined, and the surgeon cut off a section of this thing. He didn't tell her. They knew it was cancer. And what researchers were very anxious to discover at the time was a way to grow malignant cells, human cancer cells, in the lab outside the body, to study them, to see how they multiplied, how to provoke them, how to prod them, how to experiment with them. And they grabbed a slice of Henrietta's cervical cancer and they put it in the tissue lab of Dr. George Guy, G-E-Y it's spelled, at Johns Hopkins. And guess what happened?
It grew.
It went nuts.
It grew like
crazy.
Oh, jeez.
Yes. So I'm going to read from the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. By the next morning, the cells had doubled, and within 24 hours, they doubled again. Henrietta's cells grew to fill as much space as they were given. They kept growing like nothing anyone had seen, doubling their numbers every 24 hours, stacking hundreds on top of hundreds, accumulating by the millions. As long as they had food and warmth, Henrietta's cancer cells were unstoppable.
Now, I want to stop you right here, Sofia. We got a woman who was working in the tobacco fields that were being watered and fertilized with radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project, sitting on plants and being around plants that were no doubt loaded up with chemical pesticides and carrying the tobacco mosaic virus. So we got radiation biology with viral particles and poisons, and now we got this purple tumor coming out of her, and it grows outside of the body. It sounds like something from another world. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sophia.
it sounds like sci-fi. Okay, so I want to take us back to tobacco. Now, tobacco is a very, very unusual plant, all right? It is unique. Number one, its ability to phytoremediate the soil is incredible. There was a study done in southeast Serbia on top of the defunct Kalna Gabrovnica uranium mine. That mine had been going from 1953 to 1962, and they planted Virginia and Burley tobacco strains on this mine. And they studied the leaves and the stems, and they found that tobacco just scooped up uranium from the soil. It's a phytoremediator. It's a bioremediator naturally. So the Standard Chemical Company of Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, was founded in 1911. It lasted until 1933. And they took their waste. What they did was, that was supposed to be America's top radium producer, and they produced radium from uranium. This is what Marie Curie worked so hard at doing, that, you know, basically killed her. To make a tiny bit of radium takes 500 tons of uranium ore, 500 tons of chemicals. This is just 1 gram of radium. You need 500 tons of uranium, 500 tons of chemicals, 10,000 tons of purified water, and 100 tons of coal to get 1 little gram of radium. So the tailings, that's the word they use, the industry word for the waste. And they actually did ship uranium tailings over to tobacco fields and use them as fertilizer.
And then they wrapped them up in paper and sent them off to our boys over in uniform in the war to smoke.
Yeah, free cigarettes to the army, I know. Now, it's very interesting that Henrietta would develop this incredibly aggressive tumor. And hers became, they called them HeLa cells, because the way labs named the specimens at the time, they took the first 2 letters of your first name and your last name, so Henrietta Lacks, H-E-L-A. HeLa cells became possibly the most popular cell line in biotech. It was in the 50s, the Tuskegee Institute, which was actually, I think it was a university, Tuskegee University for blacks.
It's hammer time for these agendas, folks. Messing with innocent people. It's hammer time.
Right. The Tuskegee Institute was a place that was tasked with producing the HeLa cell line. And Henrietta cells, I want to read this. This is wild. If you want to picture sci-fi, Henrietta cells could float through the air on dust particles. This is without dying, okay? They could travel from one culture to the next on unwashed hands or used pipettes. They could ride from lab to lab on researchers' coats and shoes through ventilation systems. Now, guess what they discovered? 2 scientists in 1953, William Scherer and Jerome Siverton, these were from the University of Minnesota. They found that HeLa cells, Henrietta's cancer cells, could be infected with all 3 types of poliovirus. And why would that be, Joe? Remember what I said, that cancer cells are looking for piezoelectric crystalline materials.
They're going to let, yeah, they recognize the knock at the door because they need their help, and they only let certain things in that know the secret knock code, and the virus has got them. And so they open the door, and as you say, they are allowed entrance. And we're told that they invade, right?
Yes, we're told that they invade, but the fact is, let me just say this. viruses have a polysaccharide coating, a sugar coating. Cancer cells are glycolytic, which means that they have stopped being able to produce oxygen in the nucleus by way of the mitochondria. They cannot produce energy. I shouldn't have said oxygen. They are not using oxygen for energy making in the nucleus. That's gone. The mitochondria have failed in the cancer cells. So the cell has a default mechanism. It knows how to revert to producing energy, right, through glucose and enzymes in the cytoplasm. That's called glycolysis.
And so that's why that polysaccharide head fits right in the door of the cell.
Exactly. So the cancer cell is a sugar-dependent cell, and viruses are coated with sugar. So there's a match there. So it was Leo Szilard, the atomic scientist that I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, who figured out how to irradiate HeLa cells such that poliovirus could actually be cultured on them.
All right, so I'm going to stop right here. Okay. What Sofia has laid out on this broadcast, and we've talked about this, I've touched on this as well, but what she's laid out here is, look, folks, 6 cells send out the word for the viruses to come in and multiply and help clean up. These guys have been playing God in the devil's mansion, and I take that term from Sofia. She coined it herself. We're living in the devil's mansion, folks. But they have figured out a way to screw up cells so bad and make them want the Antichrist to knock on the door and bring his buddies. That's exactly what they're doing right now with HeLa cells and polio viruses. I'm sorry for that explanation, but I just had to get it out there.
Right. No, it's perfect. So in the 50s and thereafter, researchers, because HeLa cells could be produced so cheaply and so quickly, they began to buy them to experiment on. And remember, these are cancer cells that are being used as the basis for biological experimentation.
Medical research. They're using, it's like playing with sticks of dynamite at a bonfire at the beach. It's like, what the heck?
Right, but we have to remember that Rebecca Skloot tells us that despite being cancerous, HeLa cells still shared many basic characteristics with normal cells. They produced proteins and communicated with one another like normal cells. They divided and generated energy. They expressed genes and regulated them. They were susceptible to infections, which made them an optimal tool for synthesizing and studying any number of things in culture, including bacteria, hormones, proteins, and especially viruses. This thing that even Skloot doesn't, well, of course she doesn't understand what a virus is. So that whole book, you have to read it with a particular lens. You have to remember that it's pushing the viral theory of disease. And when I finished the book, I had some impressions of what its point was and why it became a bestseller, all right? So anyway, we have to say that viruses, we have to remember, viruses are repair materials. And one thing that Skloot tells us is viruses reproduce by injecting bits of their genetic material into a living cell, essentially reprogramming the cell so it reproduces the virus instead of itself. Well, if you look at that in terms of being a healing agent, viruses, crystalline materials made by the body to address damage.
Piezoelectric crystalline structures that are electron donors at the most important time of electron need.
Right. Viruses influence the cells to make more of these repair materials themselves. It's that saying, Joe, don't just give a man fish, teach him how to fish.
This is amazing information. It's so, you know, folks, the whole Rockefeller medicine, it's a criminal enterprise. And for those of you out there who are being murdered by your doctors, it's never too late to get out from the grips of allopathic sorcery and witchcraft and look into some alternatives. We're not doctors, but we're also not going to sit here and remain silent in the face of the onslaught against humanity. So You know, this whole theory, once again, and now we're being told that, oh, I keep hearing, oh, there's these new mystery viruses and these emerging viruses, and we've got these threats that, look, folks, it's like, no, the broken glass didn't cause a car accident. The guy that was hopped up on Lowenbrows and skunk joints is the guy that ran into the center divider. And it's not the broken glass that caused the car to crash. It was the guy that's crashed in his brain that caused the car to wreck. The same thing's going on here, folks. They're showing up, and you got somebody ostensibly who's been writing their initials on the hood of their 1952 Chevy that's got a bunch of uranium and plutonium dust from the Nevada test site on the hood, and they're writing their initials on it, and they're going to ride their bike, you know, past the community pool where that big tanker truck was spraying DDT on the lunch tables at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're going to go home and sit on a table that's got lead paint on it and drink out of a glass that's got lead paint on it, and they're going to drink milk that was produced from a cow about 5 miles away that was loaded up with feed laced with diethylstilbestrol and estrogen compounds. And you wonder why these kids were getting sick in the 50s. And what's happening is they're undergoing mitochondrial collapse. And so the cells are freaking out, saying, oh my gosh, come save me. And so they're putting out the clarion call to the viruses in the body, endemic viruses in the body, to come in and get inside here and help me fix this problem. And so they get in there and start replicating. Can you imagine, just for a second, folks, can you imagine when your car breaks down, you could snap your fingers and instantly have 20 mechanics show up, and then they get into your car, they can turn into 100 to have your car fixed in 10 seconds? That's exactly how your body works. And these psychotic, murdering freaks tell you that your body's solution to the problem is the problem, and they're the solution. I can't take this anymore. It is hammer time for all this bullshit. It's over, folks. We cannot let these people genetically modify and engineer bioweapons and put them in syringes and pump them into our children. No more. It's hammer time. Figuratively speaking, of course. Go ahead, Sophia.
Well, I want to now speak of another person called John Moore. John Moore was a surveyor on the Alaska pipeline, and he had something called hairy cell leukemia. And his spleen was filled with malignant cells. It actually ended up weighing 22 pounds. Okay? So they operated on John Moore. He was sent from Alaska. His doctor sent him to UCLA. UCLA took out his spleen, his tumorous spleen, and then they wanted him to come back to be monitored every few months.
Sophia, real quick, I want to make a point because I see a comment here. Back in the 50s, when the diethylstilbestrol was being put in the animal feeds, and these women were drinking the milk and eating the ice cream, that milk was not pasteurized, ladies and gentlemen. They weren't pasteurizing milk. It was raw milk. It was cream top. And those women were getting jacked, and those unborn children were getting jacked on phytoestrogens that caused all kinds of autoimmune disorders, and it wasn't being helped. It was being aided and abetted by the nuclear fallout and the DDT wallpaper and the lead wrapper on the junior mints. Go ahead, Sophia. I'm sorry. Back to your discussion of the spleen tumor.
John Moore. So this is back in the 70s. And John Moore continues to travel to UCLA to be monitored. And they're drawing blood and bone marrow from him. And he thinks they're doing this because they're concerned about him. Well, I'll read from Rebecca Skloot's book. Moore discovered that UCLA had devoted much of the 7 years since his surgery to developing and marketing a cell line that they called MO, M-O. So this Dr. David Gold, who had worked on him at UCLA, had filed for a patent on Moore's cells.
Here we go again.
And several extremely valuable proteins those cells produced. Gold hadn't yet sold the rights to the patent, but according to the lawsuit that Moore eventually filed, Gold had signed agreements with a biotech company that gave him stocks and financing worth more than $3.5 million to commercially develop and scientifically investigate the Mo cell line. At that point, its market value was estimated to be $3 billion. Okay, so patents on biological things began in 1980. There was an he was a directed evolution specialist. He was a microbiologist called Ananda Chakrabarty. He was born in Calcutta, India. He worked for General Electric, and that's where he began to do some genetic cross-linking on a variety of bacteria called Pseudomonas putida. We've heard of oil-eating or oil-metabolizing bacteria, right?
Absolutely. I did a research paper my 5th year at UCI on just that. That was the topic of my presentation.
So Pseudomonas putida, as it was tinkered with by Dr. Chakrabarty, ended up being able to gobble up 2/3 of the hydrocarbons in an oil spill. And guess what Chakrabarty did? He filed a patent on his variant of Pseudomonas putida. It was the very first U.S. GMO patent, Ananda Chakrabarty. This was in the late 70s. The U.S. Patent Office, foolishly thinking that the patent code wasn't intended for living things, denied that patent, but the United States Court of Customs and Patent Appeals ruled otherwise. It said the fact that microorganisms are alive is without legal significance for the purpose of patent law. And this ruling resulted in the famous lawsuit, Diamond versus Chakrabarty. So Sidney Diamond was the U.S. Commissioner of Patents and Trademarks, and he actually stood up for the biological kingdom, and he took the Chakrabarty matter in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, a live human-made microorganism is patentable subject matter under Title 35, United States Code 101. Respondent's microorganism constitutes a manufacture or composition of matter within that statute. So Chakrabarty's legal team said, if human ingenuity could alter a biological form, then that form was no longer natural and it could definitely be patented. And this case, Diamond versus Chakrabarty, Supreme Court case, opened the door for patenting living things. And the reason this is important, Joe, is because people don't realize it. When you are in a doctor's office or hospital and tissues are removed from your body, any claim you might have to owning them disappears. When you leave your tissues in a medical facility, even if it's in the garbage can, you abandon them as waste, and anyone can take your garbage and sell it. Since John Moore had abandoned his cells, they were no longer a product of his body. This is the Supreme Court of California ruling. His cells had been transformed after he abandoned them into an invention, and now they were the product of Dr. David Gold's human ingenuity and inventive effort.
You hear that, folks? See, what they do is they jack you up on poison and irradiate you, sleep deprive you, and screw up your brain and your soul and your body and everything else. And then you go in for the old checkup and they harvest you, right? They cut pieces off you, and then they go stick it in laboratories and mess with it some more and then replicate it. And so, Sophia, we kind of got away from something here, but these HeLa cells, are they not in just about all the vaccines still? I mean, are these childhood vaccines?
I'm going to get to this.
Yeah. Okay. I don't mean to get ahead of you.
Everybody up.
Yeah. All right. Go right ahead.
All right. So the Supreme Court of California said that if they were to rule, or any court was to rule in Moore's favor, this is a quote, destroy the economic incentive to conduct important medical research. And if you give patients property rights in their tissues, you will hinder research by restricting access to the necessary raw materials.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's the beginning of organ harvesting and playing Frankenstein with our body parts, right there.
Now, today, HeLa cells sell for up to $10,000 a vial. And at the time Skloot wrote this book, when she finished, 2009, 2010, there were over 17,000 U.S. patents having to do with HeLa cells. That's just HeLa cells.
And so on the flip side, forget the economics. These things can be airborne. They're in all kinds of different hands of all kinds of levels of people with different levels of adeptness at dealing with biohazards. I mean, for all we know, we could be breathing these things. They could be putting them in the chemtrails for all we know. Right?
Right. I mean, there is, I did some research on Pseudomonas. I mean, you can click your mouse and boom, you have research in front of you. You have to, of course, question the source, but this is well known that the Pseudomonas bacteria, Joe, they actually form rain and snow atmospherically. They are in the air. They produce proteins in their cell walls that bind water, even if they're dead. In fact, ski resorts will use Pseudomonas to make snow.
That's how they blow it. They put it in the mix and they blow it. Yeah.
Yes. And get this, the bacterium, that particular one, is Pseudomonas syringae, Syringae. And I looked that up because I was thinking syringe, okay, please, don't make it this obvious. And it really means tubular. It comes from a variety of flower or something. It's Latin word for tube. So I suspect that this Pseudomonas has a tubular shape. But anyway, yeah, so atmospheric scientists became very interested in Pseudomonas.
Now, real quick, folks, Pseudomonas syringae. Now, if you're going to go to a ski resort that's producing artificial snow, you're going to be huffing this stuff, folks. You know, like if you got a fog machine, you know, like the one these crooked churches use to make you all, you know, trip out on Sunday and give them all your money. You know, they got these fog machines when they're up there playing rock and roll on the stage instead of telling you the truth about God. You got to put glycerin in with some water. Well, they put these bacteria in with their water to make the snow. You're huffing and puffing this stuff. This is just, you know, go on.
Well, Joe,
I'm sorry.
What I think we have to be mindful of is that there are incredibly huge numbers of human tissues sitting around.
They've probably got warehouses and all this stuff's in cryogenic freezers all over the place with a bunch of 180 IQ kids on grants doing stuff. They don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah, even the chief of staff of the National Institutes of Health said, as Skloot was writing her book, this is a massive scale. And I will just read from the book. The samples, these are medical samples from ordinary people. They come from routine medical procedures, tests, operations, clinical trials, research donations. They sit in lab freezers, on shelves, in industrial vats of liquid nitrogen. They're stored at military facilities, the FBI, the National Institutes of Health. They're in biotech company labs and most hospitals. Biobanks store appendixes, ovaries, skins, sphincters, testicles, fat, foreskins. Foreskins from most circumcisions are saved, by the way. And, you know, and there's going to be more. They're going to start gathering tissues to map cancer genes. They're doing this already because this book is old. And look, we've been sending samples by the millions to these DNA companies, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and you are only able to get your personal medical or genealogical information if you first sign a form granting permission for your sample to be stored for future research.
So what we've got on our hands here, folks, is you go to the doctor, you're given them carte blanche to harvest you and to take your tissues and play God with it and reverse engineer viruses and vaccines and things that can kill you. Okay, and when we go back to what's going on, I mean, we can talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, the Kennedy administration, the centrifuge, and him flushing his toilet 150,000 times a day with all kinds of, you know, simian virus particles in these test tubes going into the municipal water. Look, folks, they've been at this a long time, and they've completely inverted. They've turned Superman into the biggest villain in history, and they've turned kryptonite into the savior. Okay, if you're following the cartoon, they flipped the whole thing. The viruses are something our bodies make. Our body has a system where it takes care of itself. If it's grounding and getting electrons, you're getting sunlight, fresh air, water, sleep, good nutrition, minerals, and all the things that God made it almost impossible to avoid. I mean, because it's like, how are you supposed to avoid being in contact with the earth and getting the sun? That thing's hanging up there and we're walking on it. So it's like the two no-brainers, they've already taken them away from us. Sunglasses, tinted windows, and rubber shoes, and synthetic carpets and high-density housing where you're 10 feet off the ground all the time. Look, folks, now they got the syringes tipped with genetically engineered viruses that in their natural state could be summons to aid in the restoration of ailing cells, and now they're being turned into weapons, ladies and gentlemen. So HeLa cells, Sophia, continue to talk about this burgeoning market for these tumor cells that are finding their way. I'm sure they're probably in the ice cream now, right? As flavor enhancers. I mean, we know that.
I don't know. I mean, I can't say things like that, but I do suspect that HeLa cells have been incorporated into all kinds of pharmaceuticals, and they've been definitely used as a substrate to produce a lot of different things that we are using and buying, including being in our vaccines.
So HeLa cells are in everything. Let's just say they're putting them in all the vaccines. So here's what's really scary. So, where I grew up in Garden Grove, there was a house 2 streets over that had really weird people living in it. And the only people that would ever go visit that house were really scary. That was a weird house. A HeLa cell is a weird cell. And the only kind of viruses that cell is going to call to have them help it out when it gets in trouble are a bunch of weird viruses, folks. So if they're putting all these weird cells in us, you think it's putting out the call for the wrong people to come to the aid of the organism? I think that's exactly what they're setting up. Go ahead, Sophia.
Joe, HeLa cells are a supercell, meaning they require very little expertise, you could call it, to handle. And first year students in, I don't even know, cell biology, biotech, whatever, they are given HeLa cells to use, to culture, because anyone can do it just about. HeLa cells, this was the amazing thing about them. If you took cancerous tissue and put it in a petri dish, it usually died. This was back in the 50s and even in the 60s and even now, because it required a warm body to live in. Yet the HeLa cell could grow outside the body with very little care. It just flowered. This is why I call it a supercell. And it was a beautiful platform on which to culture viruses, because it just had this affinity for viruses. Now, you're saying it had an affinity for the weirdest viruses. I can't speak to that. I don't know. But I can tell you that from reading this book, it's very clear that the HeLa cell was the first immortal cell. Cancer cells are infinite cells because a tumor is a cell line that just keeps reproducing. It's gone psycho, the cell. It has lost its ability to metabolize oxygen. That's called oxygen phosphorylation in the nucleus. It has become glycolytic. It feeds on sugar. And it says, all right, I'm going to survive. You know that Gloria Gaynor song, first I was afraid, I was petrified. Okay, well, the cancer cell becomes an I will survive cell. Okay?
And you people feed cancer with sugar. Sugar's a weapon, and if you have cancer, you need to avoid sugar like the plague. And you need to avoid sugar, period, folks. Cancer feeds on sugar. That's why they're putting sugar in everything to kill you.
All right, calm down.
It's hammer time for sugar. Okay? Hammer time for sugar. You can't see me, can you?
Cell, being this very powerful supercell, glycolytic supercell, became a very ready medium on which to grow viruses. And one vaccine researcher told me that it's in every vaccine now today, has HeLa cells. So this is what I want to say to people. you can tell people that vaccines don't work, this, that, or the other thing. You can give them the science about adjuvants, about complex proteins and oils over triggering the Th2 immune system, blah, 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 you know, all this stuff causing autoimmune disease. You can talk about the phenol, the aluminum, the neurotoxins
mercury,
that are in them.
yeah, all
and people will have a hard time trying to grasp this. You can see it in their eyes. They just too much, too many big words, too many concepts that are foreign. But if you tell them that their flu shot, their whatever, their MMR shot that they give their child has the most ferocious cancer cells in it ever known to man, what do you think will be the expression on their face? Huh?
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? Repeat that sentence, Sophia.
If we know that HeLa cells were in the polio vaccine, that became a well-known fact. That was not hidden. So the Salk polio vaccine contained HeLa cells, the most ferocious cell known to man, a cancer cell, a malignant cell from somebody's tumor. And I want you to know that Henrietta Lacks died a year or so after they harvested that bit of tissue from her cervix, that cancerous tissue, and saw it grow, you know, into basically the Amazon rainforest. She was full of tumors when they opened her up on autopsy, full of them everywhere, white bulbous tumors everywhere. The woman was in absolutely extraordinary pain when she died. And I want you to know something. The Lacks family got nothing, has never received a dime, even though HeLa cells are the best-selling cell in biotech. They have never received one red cent.
So everybody gets screwed all around except for the eugenicists, folks. They're the ones that always think they're going to come up ahead every time. I got news for you guys. If you guys are out there and you're making your fat paychecks off of trying to kill everybody, there's a special fireplace that's been lit for a long time that's going to welcome you with open arms when you die. That's all I can tell you. You better get with the program and you better repent from your evil, wicked deeds. You cannot sit here and tell me that I'm going to inject my child with 70 syringes full of cancer cells that got Satan's army of viruses following it into the doctor's office. No, thank you. Okay, folks. One of the best here's why the vaccine inserts state that they have never been tested for mutagenic potential, because they got HeLa cells in them. They've never been tested for carcinogenic potential because they've got HeLa cells in them. They've never been tested for impairment of fertility because they got HeLa cells in them. And that's just one reason why they won't test this stuff, because they don't want to know what's in them. They don't want to know what this stuff does because they don't want you to know what this stuff does. But they know what this stuff does, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they write that on the box that says it hasn't been tested, you knuckleheads. Wake up. Cancer cells are being used to culture vaccinations. Okay, that's a fact. And you know what? It wouldn't surprise me if they're being used to develop other things like insulin and all these other over-the-counter. I shouldn't say over-the-counter, but these pharmaceutical agents have become as American as apple pie and Chevrolet, right? Well, I mean, that used to be American. I guess it's not American anymore. My point is everybody's on something, and you probably got HeLa cells in your medicine cabinet, for crying out loud. What?
And Joe, the other thing is that, as you've explained and clarified, and I've explained tonight, viruses are endogenous, meaning the body makes them. They're like the 20 or 100 mechanics that show up because the cell gives a cry for help and the DNA responds. It orders a specially designed repair agent meant only for that individual. So that army of repair materials called viruses, crystalline repair materials, is sent out by the body to the area that needs it. And when they create vaccines out of what they call viral culture, what they start with is somebody else's tissues. This is what they were doing in the sandbox of toddlers enjoying their anal stage, as I referred to it. These scientists were taking the most disgusting materials they could find, human feces, rabbit brains mashed up. I mean,
They were crossing
disgusting.
species. They were crossing species barriers, permeating orifices with toxins and excrement. I mean, you couldn't imagine doing this stuff in a satanic nightmare marathon.
No,
I mean,
it's diabolical.
it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
And they're putting it in other living creatures'
And this is
bodies,
medicine.
right in the bloodstream.
This is modern medicine, folks. This
Yeah,
is the
it's
crap that
barbaric.
modern medicine is based on. It's
And
freaking
listen,
sorcery
they
and witchcraft.
hide it. They hide it behind white coats, a lot of steel, a lot of surgical instruments, all this sanitation. They're cleaning and scrubbing all the time. They wash their hands up to the elbows every 5 minutes. I'm not saying that's bad, but that's how they hide what they're doing in these labs. It's all masked with that veneer of expertise, cleanliness, you know, the best the world offers, shiny instruments.
All I know is, you know, I have a pretty large network of friends, and when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with older people growing up because I was always around people that were 20 years older than me my whole life for the most part. I was always around elders, okay? And the people I know, some of these people are tremendously wealthy. Some of these people they don't got two nickels to rub together. But you want to know something? They all got one thing in common. They're all falling apart, and the doctors are making it happen a lot faster than if they would have left themselves alone. Okay, the whole system, like Sofia said, it's got this nice veneer. It's got these beautiful windows. The lobby looks like a hotel, and you know that's got the nice music and the nice furniture. But as soon as you get in that room, you feel it, right? It's something's not right about that place because it's not. And behind closed doors and behind the scenes, they're mixing stuff in this cauldron, and they're probably chanting all kinds of demonic orations to the underworld to figure out what they should put next into the bowl as they mix it up and put it in the blender for the shot vial that's going to go into the newborn in the room upstairs. I mean, this is crazy, folks. And the point of this discussion tonight is to introduce you to a field of study that is based on reality and not bullshit, okay? Excuse the French, but you know what? When they tell us that the mechanics that are showing up to fix my car are actually a bunch of foreign invaders trying to blow my head off, that's when I say, hey, wait a minute, I need these guys to help me fix my car. They don't have a gun pointed at my head. They're here to help me change my alternator. And the doctors will tell you, no, we got to get these guys out of the room, and we got to inject you with stuff that'll kill them if they see them coming from a mile away. That is medicine, folks, and that is why everybody's sick and falling apart, because they have managed to interfere with the very basic cellular processes that are required for the body to heal and repair itself. And what have they done in addition to all this? They're irradiating you with your Wi-Fi and your Y-gig that's soon to come, the cell towers and the microwave systems and the microwave oven and the wireless doorbell and the wireless ding-dong opener and everything else you got that has to have a radio transmitter on it. And they feed you everything full of sugar and everything that makes you sick and fat and stupid and lazy and into an imbecile so they can play with you like a piece of Gumby's clay. And I'm sick of it. And you need to get pissed off because this is not right. And you want to know why your kids are all screwed up and they're sick all the time? Well, maybe if you would stop taking them to these places to keep injecting them with stuff, and maybe if you would stop taking them to these grocery stores that have the shelves lined with all this garbage, then maybe, just maybe, if you open the windows in your house and let some sunshine in, just maybe your kids might have a chance. But if you want to make cognitive dissonance your middle and last name, then guess what lies in store for you, folks? Chalk Hospital when they're young, and then the county facility when they're old and out of a job. And they'll die on a stretcher in the back room with maggots crawling up their nose, folks. And they'll wait for the organs to stop, and then they'll put them in the freezer. Listen, This is freaking insane.
Joe, also, you know, the rate of autism is skyrocketing. And autism, as we know, is a neurological problem. It's a neurological breakdown,
It's
right?
electromagnetic, it's mitochondrial dysfunction, it's demyelination, it's toxic overload. It's
Right,
all, it's a broad, once again, it's a broad brush paint the side of a barn with a target getting written on it.
right. But the autistic person can often function. We call that broad spectrum autism. And they can do tasks. They actually
They're
teach
highly
you
they can be
repetitive
highly
tasks.
specialized, repetitive performers.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can't really defend themselves. They can't really stand up in court, argue for themselves. They can't be an advocate for themselves. They need supervision.
There's the government workforce of the future right there, folks.
Exactly.
Yep.
So they will become a very ready, very limited but high in numbers workforce that probably won't complain as long as you give them. I mean, I know autistic kids that can play with an iPad and enjoy that. And as long as you can give them what they want, and give them a lot of supervision, they'll do the things that they can do. And this is the depletion of the really amazing human being. The downgrading of the human being seems to be the end goal here. And it's happening in greater and greater numbers.
And that's why we're having this talk tonight, Sophia, because we need to wake you up so that you don't let them downgrade. You know, anytime I go on vacation, I want to upgrade. I don't want this crappy room that has no view of the pool or the mountains. I want the room with the view. I want the room with the sunken bathtub. I want the room that's got the coffee maker. Okay, you should not be expecting downgraded children. You should be expecting children that are smarter than you, healthier than you, stronger than you, and better looking than you, and more successful than you. Because that's what it's all about, is to make things better for those that come after us. And if they keep downgrading us, eventually they're going to paint us into a corner and run us over with a steamroller and make a burrito out of us. I'm sick of this. This is not the way things should be, folks. And you got to stop with your cowardice and your cognitive dissonance and quit rolling over and rolling up your sleeves and letting them inject you. This is insanity.
Joe, I'm going to break into your tirade for a minute. The book, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, it's a book very worth reading. It's actually very easy to read. It's very well written. It's very interesting. And it really makes you appreciate the Lacks family as symbolizing and representing all of the people in the world whose biology, whose, family members, whose antecedents have been used by this medical profession, this world of research, and who have never been recognized or helped in any way. And the Lacks family, by the way, I just want to say this, a lot of them are suffering from a lot of serious illnesses, and they don't have a lot of money. And I can't believe over the course of the writing of this book, how many members of the Lacks family became sicker and even died because that was just where they were. They couldn't afford medical care, in spite of the fact that their mother or one of their family members, because this was an extended family, gave so much to science. So that doesn't matter to these people. That's what amazes me, that the world of science doesn't care about the human beings. The world of science only cares about commerce and contracts and finding more ways to tinker with human beings to further the New World Order agendas. Now, the other thing I was going to say was the book does refer to the fact that in spite of Henrietta's exposures, whatever they might have been, to radiation, or I don't even know if it goes into much detail. I think it's just one sentence. I mentioned it in my newsletter. By the way, what I've been talking about tonight is from my newest newsletter. I have subscribers. I spend a lot of time and energy on these newsletters. You can sign up for them by sending me, just follow the instructions under the newsletter tab on sofiasmallstorm.com. But if you want to keep up with what my favorite rabbit hole discoveries are, that's the way to do it, to sign up for my newsletter by subscription, by the way. So I'm just throwing in a little plug for that. But the author keeps bringing us back to HPV virus. She tells us that Henrietta had a very, very powerful strain of HPV, number 18. And this was what gave her the cervical cancer. And so really the book underscores the need for the HPV vaccine and other vaccines. And what blows me away is I met somebody recently who told me that her husband had throat cancer, and his throat cancer was because of HPV.
Well.
And I'm thinking, what? All right.
Yeah.
And you can just see these doctors are telling everybody that HPV is creating all these different types of cancers. This is their thing, viruses.
Well, you know, Sophia, what they've done is they've managed to get everybody focused on. They've got everybody's eye off the ball, and they've gotten us willing to accept mutating components of our immune system, and then injecting them into us, and then injecting cells into us that are foreign, and even in some cases, transgenic. And here's the other thing. I'm really, really concerned about this mad cow bovine spongiform encephalopathy thing. That, now we've got. First, they're telling us that viruses are pathogenic agents, when in fact they're an endemic component of our immune system, and they're produced by our body. Ladies and gentlemen, viruses do not reproduce on their own outside. You can't put viruses in a petri dish, full of bourbon and cheesecake, and expect them to make more viruses. Viruses have to be inside of a cell to make more viruses. Now, do you?
And also, wait, Joe, I'm going to cut in. Viruses do not lurk in ponds and in fields.
They simply don't.
They don't.
They don't
fly around to infect you and make you sick. And viruses are individually designed, meaning
for specific
the endogenous
purposes.
Viruses my body makes are intended for me and my conditions, because the cells maintain a very, very constant communication. The cells are the armies on the front line, and they're going, ooh, ow, I'm cold, I'm hot, oh, something bumped me, I'm broken, help, send me something, I have to be fixed. And these orders for these proteins, which are basically the components of viruses, are given by the DNA. They are minute by minute, second by second, millisecond by millisecond orders given for the creation of healing agents specific to the individual. My viruses are not meant for you. They're not meant for anybody else but me. They belong in my body, and that's it, and that's all.
And so what happens when you give me some of Sophia's viruses, or you give me some of the chicken's viruses, you get an autoimmune response, okay? Because the body said, hey, what? I didn't order this. When they send me something at the restaurant I didn't order, I send it back. Problem is,
that's perfect.
That's what the bodies are doing. And so why do you think, like I said in my video yesterday or the day before, the piezoelectric polio? I mean, they're injecting us with piezoelectric viruses that don't belong in these kids, that aren't native to the terrain. And by the way, Pasteur on his deathbed, what were his famous last words, Sophia? You remember?
It's the soil.
He said, I was wrong. The terrain was everything. He was looking for the boogeyman, when in fact it was the dirt. It was the terrain, the condition of the body, the health, the overall health of the body. But this whole thing with this mad cow, now they're telling us that there's this protein that folds the wrong way and becomes a pathogenic agent. I mean, here's something without any genetic material that can't reproduce. So now we got a protein that, instead of looking like this, it looks like this, and then it makes all the other ones look like this. And they're telling us that we don't know what's causing it. We don't know what the problem is. And there's a case of this, I believe, in Tennessee that was just announced on the news. And there's no cure. It's a death sentence. And now they got us worried about prions, another possible pathogenic agent that can start eating our brain up. I mean, where's
pathogenic?
Yeah, I mean, so it's like they got us looking over our shoulder for our shadow, even when the lights are out now. I mean, what in the world, Sophia? What do you make of this whole mad cow thing?
So we were trying to discuss that this afternoon, and I really don't have the kind of knowledge you have about it. But I will say this. I want to go to the work of Stephanie Seneff. Can we talk about glycine?
Yeah, and I was hoping you would, because I'm looking at a can of Diet Coke in my kitchen that on my desk here that I didn't drink, but I brought it here for another discussion. And Sophia has done some amazing research on what she's about to talk about and how it ties into what's on the shelves in the drugstores. Go ahead, Sophia.
Well, all right. I just want people to know the research is not mine. The research is that of Dr. Stephanie Seneff from MIT. Really, she is one of the most amazing people. And there are other people who have done this kind of research as well. But Seneff is a very brilliant woman, and I mentioned her name, I think, in the last show I did with you. And I just kind of went into her presentations and her work and studied it and slowed the YouTube down so that I could understand clearly. And what's happening in our world, in the biological world today, is that the very most simple, basic amino acid, it's called glycine, has been supplanted by glyphosate. And they are very, very similar. They're almost like identical twins, except that glyphosate is man-made, and glyphosate has a nitrogen atom in it that is different from glycine. Glycine is the proper form of this particular amino acid when it comes to nature. Glycine, I made the analogy before on the last show, that glycine is like a sleek, beautifully designed compact car. And glyphosate is the same design, except it has a nitrogen atom that is, you could say, overstuffed. It has a methylphosphonyl chain in it that isn't in the glycine amino acid version. So when proteins are synthesized, when proteins are built or synthesized out of amino acids, and the DNA codes for proteins. The DNA is the recipe book, and it says, make this protein, and this is how you make it. Take some of this, take some of that, put it together. So the body will grab amino acids from what's called the amino acid pool. So every time you eat protein or eat food, the proteins are taken out of the food. The food is broken down into lipids, sugars, and fats, sugars, and proteins. And the proteins are broken down into amino acids that go into the amino acid pool. And then the body orders repair materials to be synthesized from that amino acid pool. And what are proteins? Proteins repair the body, and they also are structural materials for the body. So they have a very specific, you could call it like a physical, utilitarian kind of presence and function in the body. And glycine is the most simple amino acid, and it is a component of many, many different kinds of protein in the body. But when proteins that are, the recipe is for glycine, when those proteins are made out of glyphosate, because glyphosate has entered the body and floating around in it, and glyphosate, as we know, is in Roundup, and it's been used before Roundup was even invented in Roundup Ready crops in the late 90s. Glyphosate was used as a desiccant, a drying agent on lots and lots of crops, because it made the crops easier to harvest. You could cut them down, you could fit more in the transport trucks if the wheat was dried out. So they use glyphosate as a preparatory chemical on crops they're about to harvest. So it was already in the food chain. And when your body has glyphosate in it and your body thinks that's glycine and it tries to create proteins out of this glyphosate, the protein doesn't work right. It has a little bump in it from the glyphosate, from the nitrogen atom that's funky, that glycine wouldn't have. So you're trying to use that protein to build things. You're trying to use that protein to carry things. And that protein is not working right. It's bumping and crashing and spilling. And your body says, oh my, there's a mistake here in this recipe. And it tries to denature the protein, but it can't. It's very unsuccessful at taking that protein apart and rebuilding it correctly because it's got this glyphosate to deal with. And Stephanie Seneff maintains that this is the reason that a lot of our failure, our degeneration stems from. It stems from the fact that the simplest amino acid glycine is being substituted with glyphosate in the body. And that's the wrong agent to be building with.
And that definitely has correlation to a lot of the autoimmune, autism. You've just got health in general in decline. You know, weight's going up, longevity's going down, IQs are dropping. I mean, it's just, you know, people's immune systems are compromised. No one can put a finger on how everything's falling apart. And this is just another component. You add in all the microwave exposure and so tell us more about this. This is a very fascinating topic.
So I have to talk about the chitinate pathway, but before I talk about that, I will tell you how they created Roundup Ready plants, all right? So Seneff wrote me this in an email, Dr. Seneff. I should be a little more respectful.
How do you spell that for our listeners?
S like Sophia, E-N like Nancy, E-F-F like Frank.
All right, there you go, folks. Look her up.
Go to YouTube, Stephanie Seneff. And really, she talks very fast. So I would urge you to slow the thing down. You can go to the little gear icon and slow the speed down, and you'll get a lot more out of it. But anyway, so as scientists were playing around with glyphosate, they found that there was a bacterium that figured out how to get around glyphosate. Bacterium modified its own genetic code. It got rid of glycine at residue 96 in the protein. And the change was calling for a code. The code called for alanine instead of glycine. So a little bacterium all by itself figured out how to survive glyphosate by changing its own genetic code, and it changed glycine. It wiped that out and substituted into the code alanine. And that's the basis of Roundup Ready plants. They have put in a synthase gene.
And while you're putting on your Levi jeans, you're reaching for that diet joke that's been sweetened with phenylalanine. There we go. So they're already setting it up for us to be using the diet joke as the new pathway. God help us, ladies and gentlemen. I mean,
and the other thing that she said to me, she says this in her talk that she gave for Autism One, which is a group on a channel on YouTube maybe as well. Dr. Seneff talking here. I suspect some of the vaccines are contaminated with glyphosate because vaccine cultures are grown on gelatin derived from the cartilage of pigs. The pigs are fed a heavy dose of GMO Roundup Ready corn and soy feed. There's no doubt pigs are being exposed to lots of glyphosate. Gelatin, which is where they're growing the vaccine cultures, comes from collagen, and collagen is loaded with glycine. So glycine, remember, has been replaced with glyphosate in animals that are exposed to GMOs, Roundup Ready corn and soy. So 1/4 of the collagen in your body, collagen is the most common protein in the body, all right? 1/4 of all the protein in your body is collagen, and collagen is loaded with glycine. Up to 1/4 of the amino acids in collagen are glycines. The collagen is all over your bones and joints. And so one thing Senef wrote to me personally is that she says, I suspect the epidemic we are seeing in opioid abuse is due to the agony people are experiencing when the collagen in their joints and bones misfolds due to glyphosate contamination. Then its properties in terms of strength, elasticity, and ability to hold water become compromised, and you get a situation of bone rubbing against
Bone on
bone.
bone, pain, osteo, and art. Yeah, this whole arthritis thing, and all these chronic degenerative disorders of the joints, and people are just in excruciating pain, and they're all hopped up on oxys because nothing else works for them. This is just, folks. It all starts and ends with you. And it all starts and ends with you using your noggin and staying away from these allopathic petrochemical pill pushing poisoning monsters in white coats. I mean, hey, if you're in a car accident, you break your neck, get your butt into the ER and have them put you in a brace and do a fusion on you. But if you got a fever, or if you're, look, hey, enter at your own risk. That's all I can say. I got no use for these doctors. They're dangerous. Just like I don't take my BMW to the mechanic unless there's something I can't fix. If I hear something under the hood, I'm going to stick my head in there and say, hey, do I need to change the serpentine belt? Or do I need to add some oil? Or do I need to have a lifter change in this thing? I'm certainly not going to take my car to the mechanic when there's nothing wrong with it. Why do you do that to yourself? I'll tell you what, I've been to a crooked mechanic, and I know my car. It's very simple. It's a 1997 4-cylinder BMW, and it's a very simple car. I can change the spark plugs. I can check and drain fluids in the thing. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to service that vehicle. But I've taken it to a crooked mechanic, and he told me I needed to change the wheel bearings. I needed to change the this, that, and the other. And he tried to sell me a bill of goods when there's nothing wrong with the car. You go to the doctors, that's what they do. Oh, look what we found. Oh, well, you need to start this, and this, and come back next week, and we'll run this test. And before you know it, you got your wife in there too, and they're smashing her boobs up against the X-ray machine. And then a couple months later, will find some lumps and say, "Whoa, looky here, she's got breast cancer." I mean, then they're going to put her on tamoxifen and chemo and make her look like Sinead O'Connor. I mean, folks, this is nuts. All right, and you know what? You're already Roundup ready. I guess stop buying that stuff. Get it out of your house. Bend over and pick your weeds. You don't need to spray poison all over your yard. That's going to give your kid a much better chance of ending up on the spectrum and in a special ed class. We got to put a stop to this. We got to put a stop to this. And I would venture to say that that the diet joke and the phenylalanine that was invented by the cereal company that was run by Rumsfeld himself, who brought this bioweapon to market as a sweetener, who ended up getting gobbled up by Monsanto, is heavily involved in a very sinister plan to do us in with a combination of the glyphosate and this sweetener. And I don't mind telling you, folks, I am deeply concerned over the content of this broadcast tonight. And that's why Sophie, I don't think I've ever gone 2 hours on a live stream, but we still got almost 500 people watching us right now. So,
well, they are very brave to have ridden this wave with us as long as they did. And I'm going to just finish with this one thing. So we were talking about gene insertion, and we were talking about all the pain that people are having with the degeneration that's occurring in them. Well, as they have created the Roundup Ready plants with gene insertion that they copied from this very, very innovative bacterial form that knew how to substitute alanine for glycine. They're going to be doing that to us, I imagine. They're going to tell us, look, you have this crippling rheumatoid arthritis. You're constantly in pain. What do they take for that? OxyContin or something, that people are taking these opioids.
Yep.
They will tell us, you don't have to deal with pain like this. We can give you gene insertion.
Gene therapy, yeah.
Yeah. So we will insert the code. We will change your own DNA code to disallow glycine and allow for alanine, for instance. a substitute protein. And the body won't work the same. I mean, it really won't. It's like having that little funky tire on your car when you get a flat. You know, you put that little baby donut on there. But it works. The car drives. So people may actually embrace this. They may see this as a way out of horrible degenerative disease, crippling pain. You know, people who have things like spinal stenosis. I mean, and they have to have their spines frozen. I mean, these solutions that they have for very...
It's barbaric. It's barbaric.
Yeah. So if they give you, there's something called IgT, immunoprophylaxis by gene transfer. And this is the new future. This is the new future of medicine, Joe. They're going to tell us someday, they're going to look back and say, those doctors, you know, in the 1900s, they were morons. They were barbarians. They used to give people chemical drugs they gave people against disease. Can you imagine? Today, we have gene transfer. You don't have to have a disease. We'll take it right out of your code. You'll never feel it. You'll never have it.
Except there's one problem with all this.
Right.
And you know, there's a biotech company down in San Diego, and they made this corn called epicite corn. And this was, I think this is probably 15 years ago. They had this crap where it sterilizes you by inserting these genes into these corn plants. It makes it so that the sperm has a deformed head and that the eggs can't be penetrated. And of course, they pulled it from the market, supposedly. For all we know, that's probably already in the silos in some of these other countries, and the pollens in the fields. But the point is, if you're going to go for this gene insertion baloney, you better get ready for the full Monty, folks, because they may be able to take your pain away, but guess what else they can take away? They can take away your life, ladies and gentlemen. And you want to know something? They're going to go so far as they'll try to take away your soul. They'll try to genetically engineer your pineal gland out of existence and your consciousness and your hunger and thirst for God and for truth. You cannot let these people do this to us. Your body is a sacred temple of the Holy Spirit. It is created by God. It is a marvelous living creation. And these people are monsters that want to have their way with you. And they're not hiding it anymore, folks. They're out in the open. And now they're coming down with laws. They're going to make it so you can't get a job unless you take the shot. You can't fly on an airplane unless you get this ID card. You got to be up to date on your vaccinations to get your real ID. Thanks, Donald Trump, by the way. You big Trojan horse fraud. ID 2020, national ID card from a Republican president. Can you believe that? Unbelievable. Anyway, Sophia, we got to cut this. We're at the 2-hour mark, and it's late. Plug your websites again for the audience, and I'll have it up when I finish editing this.
All right, my online store is avatarproducts.com, and I add new things all the time. These are things I have discovered myself that I use. I had a great run with iodine and magnesium from Joe's listeners, all of you wonderful people, a few weeks ago, and people wrote to me and said they really appreciated the results and are going to continue with using iodine and magnesium. So definitely, those are so simple, very inexpensive. I would start with that if you want to preserve lots of important things about your body. And then there's my blog, sofiasmallstorm.com, and then you can always subscribe to my newsletter. It's a minimum $50 donation. It is not a newsy newsletter. It is a personal newsletter. There are samples on the website for you to read, but this is where I discuss the things I'm starting to poke around into and in, just to try to connect dots, because that's what I like to do. And Joe has been a great friend to me over the years. His vast knowledge helps to connect a lot of dots. So Joe, I hope you and I stay in touch and we can do more shows.
Oh, absolutely, because you know, unfortunately, you and I could probably talk for hours and hours and hours and would not get tired, but I think we can only go so far with the audience. And for those of you who have tuned in tonight, please share this video. And I strongly recommend that you watch this thing a couple times to let all this sink in, because what we've covered here tonight, you may not understand or grasp it on the first or second pass, but as you go through this a couple times, it's going to sink into you just how important and revolutionary what we've discussed here tonight really is, and how truly empowering this information will be for you to preserve your health and to save your family's lineage from the clutches and the demonically inclined evil intent of the eugenicists posing as our saviors in the allopathic medical fraudulent system that is controlled and owned lock, stock, and barrel by the drug companies, folks. Radiation.
And do get the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, because the Lacks family may benefit a little bit from the proceeds of the book. There's a Lacks Foundation. I really think we have to recognize people in this world who have
sacrificed immensely.
Right. Yes. And
the
not
Lacks
been
Foundation.
recognized.
All right, and then I think the next program I think I'd like to do with you, Sophia, is on this prion threat, because I really think the government's up to something in terms of a staged outbreak to where they're going to get these syringes in everybody. And you folks, you need to wake up to the fact that the viruses are not the cause of the disease. The underlying cause of disease is poor diet and lack of exercise and toxic overload and radiation and lack of sunlight and lack of oxygen and lack of sleep and lack of love and lack of happiness. Lack of all these things.
It's mitochondrial failure.
That's right. At the core of it all.
That's the cause of disease, and it's exacerbated by all those other things.
That's what sets what kills it down to the cell. And by the way, folks, every cell in your body has a photoreceptor. Okay? And every cell in your body's got a power plant called a mitochondria. And you want to know something? You know how you screw up power plants? You short circuit them with wrong frequencies and wrong chemical constituents that they need to run. And the mitochondrial disease and the mitochondrial collapse is a result of intentional decimation of our natural ways of living, cutting us off from the grounding and the life-giving light and the foods and the waters and the clean air and the oxygen, everything else. Folks, you've got to understand, health does not come from some creep in a white coat that thinks he's God. Health does not come from a dirty syringe that's got monkey pus in it. Health comes from common sense, folks, and good old back to basics principles. And guess what? They're free. All right. We're going to cut this broadcast. Sophia, any closing words before I shut her down?
Only thank you, Joe. Thanks for the discussion. I enjoyed it. I hope that I was easy enough to understand and the feed came in clearly enough. And thank you to the listeners for sticking with this. And if you listen to it again, as Joe suggests, it might be very helpful. Thank you so much.
All right. On behalf of Sofia Smallstorm and Joe Mariano, the Fullerton Informer, we're going to sign off. And we'll talk to you in the morning on the stream, folks. God bless and good night. Good night, Sophia.